All right, can you guys see that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. So today we are going to talk about family dynamics and astrology. So this is kind of a big topic, and it can be a little diffuse. So, and a lot of the things we've talked about previously, there's been a lot of clear lines. This means this. This is a cutoff. This. There's a lot of precise delineations from analysis. But with family dynamics, we need to look at the family as an ecosystem. And ecosystems, if you look at a garden, things are a little blurrier. Lines are blurrier. Things have in astrology, when we're looking at an ecosystem, things like the moon have multiple meanings. So I don't know if you guys watched The Golden Compass or read the book. When I was little, that was like my favorite book ever. And in The Golden Compass, one of the um, main points of that is this device called the alethiometer, and it's a truth machine. And it has all these little symbols, and it's like 26 symbols, and each symbol has an infinite amount of meanings. And through the combination of those meanings, you can get the answers to any questions. And I kind of feel like astrology is similar, and I really think that this analogy is applicable when we're talking about things like family systems. So the moon, for example, could mean the mother. It could mean your attachment style. It could mean all these different things. So when you're looking at your family, you need to be a little bit flexible in the pieces that you're looking at, and know that things can kind of shift. Um, and also depending on your cultural background, your family dynamics, your family patterning, all of these different things are going to be kind of shifting. So with a lot of moving pieces, it can be a little bit overwhelming, and so it's important to just kind of maybe, like those magic eye pictures, kind of blur it a little bit and kind of see the different patterns that are arising. And then once you look at those patterns, then you can kind of try and fill in some more of the details. As we will see, um, and as I was kind of talking about earlier, it's really interesting when we talk about ourselves. In the United States, we like to think that we're individuals and we have free will and our own destiny, but I like don't know how much free will we actually have. When you look at the chart and you kind of see the patterns from multi generations before, and you see how those are affecting you and playing out, this person you've never met is affecting you. And so it's just kind of crazy to have these tides battering around your life and you're not even aware of that. So I think that's one of the gifts of astrology, is being able to become aware of these patterns and tides that are affecting your life. And awareness is the first step to overcoming them. And I think it can be very empowering for someone that's had maybe a difficult family situation, or a more toxic or dysfunctional group that they've been a part of, to identify these influences and then know that you can overcome that and you can kind of shift that meaning, like we were talking about with the alethiometer, to something that's more productive. Because really, people that come to astrology a lot of the time are searching for meaning and searching for a way to kind of overcome the past traumas that we've all experienced. So, we're just going to do a little rundown of some family dynamics, because I do think these are important to give context to different parts of your chart. So, again, we're thinking of our family system as an ecosystem, and there's been lots of studies like Harvard studies and all those different qualifications about things like birth order and how that affects you. And I just think it's really interesting because you can kind of see the astrological symbolism there. So if you have a client that comes to you, or you yourself are firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, etc., um, you can see how maybe you can see that in your chart, or maybe pay more attention to those planets that resonate with this birth order. So, for example, the firstborn. We all know that, like, the jokes about how they get more responsibility put on them, but I think this analysis in particular is interesting. So the firstborn really integrates and takes into their subconscious this drive to embody the productive needs for the family, so for success and accomplishment. And if the first child is in trouble, the father is usually in trouble. So if you think about this in immigrant families where there's a lot of so like that first generation, so that firstborn is really going to have that emphasized need to imbue that productivity. So that's just one example about how when you're looking at someone's chart or your own chart, that can have different emphasis. So maybe like really look at that Saturn if you're a firstborn and see what that Saturn is, and maybe that Saturn is playing more of a role than you would think. The secondborn is the emotional needs of the family, for good or for bad, and the mother's needs, or the mother's unconscious, or the mother's unfulfilled desires. And then one caveat actually that I should have said at the beginning. So as family structures are not like a static, unchangeable thing, like the nuclear family is a myth, that is the one that is like the true family structure. And especially as we have more same-sex, same-gender couples heading families, these dynamics are going to change. And the cool part about astrology is that we're going to shift our family paradigm, and we're going to kind of see how that all unfolds. So astrology always has this ability to kind of shift with the times and able to be put into any type of context. So just because maybe your family dynamic doesn't fit this exactly doesn't mean that you can't use these concepts to help make sense of your situation. So, but that being said, the secondborn does tend to be more aligned with the mother's needs, unconscious or unfulfilled desires. So then we have the thirdborn, and they're usually the communication needs of the family. Communication, maybe thinking some Mercury. So they're the one that's always like, you know, it's mom's birthday, you gotta call her. Or dad's having this thing going, like you need to make sure you support him. And so they tend to be the go-between and the connector for siblings and different family members. And I know it's kind of unusual these days to have more than 3, but I mean, my family, I'm the third of 5 kids. So, you know, there are bigger families out there. So the fourthborn is the black sheep or the rebel that maybe doesn't fit within the family structure. So you might think maybe some Uranus, maybe look at their Uranus. And then the fifthborn is the family mascot, the jester. Then it's like cracking jokes to ease the tension. The cute one, the little pet that, you know, everyone's like, oh, they're so cute and likes to have around. And then the sixthborn is the unifier, or, you know, the one that pacifies tensions, tries to kind of get everyone to be in harmony and get together. And then it starts all over again. So the seventh will be similar to the first and kind of be that hyper responsible person. So this happens no matter if you're in a healthy or unhealthy or toxic family dysfunction. But I wanted to talk about one dysfunctional family pattern in particular because I see this a lot, and I work with people that have a narcissistic parent a lot. So I just wanted to throw this out there in case you've been struggling with this. I find that people find the narcissistic family structure really helpful if you have gone through that, because it gives context to maybe feelings of low self-esteem or specialized family roles that aren't necessarily taken into consideration in other places. So this is a picture dynamic of the narcissistic family structure. So at the center, of course, we have the narcissist, and then the spouse or the enabler. And we'll go over what these mean a little bit. And this is from this website, howtokillanarcissist.com, that has a lot of great information about this type of family dynamic. So we have the narcissist. They create the drama. The family life revolves around them. They're kind of the director of the family life, and everyone, whether you have a good or a bad day, depends on the whim of this person. It could be the father or the mother, or both. You know, it could be any of those things. But so you have the narcissist, and then you have the enabler. It's usually a spouse, but it could be another child that puts on a front for everyone that keeps that perfect image in line, and they make sure that the narcissist's needs get met. So a lot of gaslighting, a lot of people making their needs feel invalidated. And then when you have this structure going on, you have what's called the golden child. So the golden child is the narcissist's favorite. So they're put on a pedestal, they get special treatment, like they can do no wrong. And in a narcissistic family structure, all of these roles can shift. Generally, the golden child is one person, but it can be weaponized, and that creates instability. And that, again, furthers issues like low self-esteem later on in life for all the people involved. Then usually you have the surrogate parent. So because the parents are involved in this family drama of the narcissist and the enabler helping the narcissist get their needs met, like what about all the other kids? So usually it's an older daughter gets put into the role of surrogate parent, and they have to take care of all the younger kids' needs, like make sure they get to school, their emotional needs get met as best they can. But again, they're a child themselves. So in this person, it's important they are like almost put on a role as a third parent. So if the younger kids misbehave, it's their fault, even though they're not a parent, but they're treated as a parent. So they have this hyper responsibility thrust upon them. So then you have the scapegoat. And so when we're talking about family dynamics, a lot of the times there's a child in light and a child that's carrying the shadow of the family. And in the narcissistic family structure, that is amplified to such a degree that you have the golden child, literally the child in the light, and the scapegoat child, the one that is like plunged into darkness. So all the self-hatred and limitations of the narcissist themselves gets projected onto this child. The rest of the family can pile on because they don't want to be this child because everything's so unstable and toxic in their family. But because the scapegoat child never was able to kind of fit in, they're usually the one that's likely to rebel and question the family structure. So to bring that back to astrology, it'd be interesting to look at what their Uranus is. And then you have the lost child. So the one that's just like never gets their need met. They're neither the one in the light or the shadow. So they're just like totally neglected. And they probably want to be in the family drama because then at least they'll get attention. But they just aren't, air quote, not good enough for the narcissist. All right. So any questions about that? I know if you haven't heard this before, this might be kind of new material. No, we're good. Okay. All right. So
I have a
sure.
question. Sorry for the delay.
No, that's fine.
So based on where your Uranus is, that's like based on what planet it is and what house it's in, that's how you can determine where you fall into this category?
No, I just think that there's interesting parallels between the symbology of astrology and these different roles within this family. So it's interesting when you're looking at your family dynamic or you're looking at a client's family dynamic and you're kind of talking and listening to their story and kind of sussing out where they fit within this ecosystem, to look at these planets that are emphasized and see, is that planet emphasized in this chart, or maybe this planet has more emphasis than it looked at kind of first glance. Does that make sense?
Kind of, sort of. Okay. So would that fall like, okay, all right. So what if it was in Pluto?
Yeah, so we will talk about Pluto in particular.
Okay.
Pluto,
I know that's like the rebel, right?
Uranus is the rebel. Pluto
Okay.
tends to be about power dynamics
Oh,
and
that's right. Okay.
family secrets, which
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So good segue to start talking about the planets. So the moon is very important when we're talking about family dynamics. So going back to that alethiometer analogy, the moon can take on multiple roles within a chart. You know, first thing we want to look for the mother, but the mother is also the source of kind of your first relationship. It's the primary nurturer. It's your attachment styles. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of secure versus insecure versus avoidant attachment, but all those different attachment styles come from your relationship with the mother. So the moon can also represent that. It can also represent your sense of safety and well-being as a child, and then kind of your ability to be safe and secure in yourself as an adult. If you're looking at children's charts, they are like all moon until puberty, because your sun is like your ego, your ability to illuminate and put yourself into the world, but children are reactive. They are in there, I need this now, I'm hungry. So when you're a parent, you're like, oh, let's look at astrology to like look at my child's chart. Like you look at their moon sign, and that's how they're going to react. That's how they're going to get their needs met, is through their moon. And so when we're looking at family dynamics, it's really interesting to look at other family members' moons and your moon. Do your emotional needs mesh? Do they not mesh? Do you have a different element than your mother's and father's moon? Are your siblings like kind of all the same? Do you have similar elemental moons, or are they really different? Are they jarring? Are they squared to each other? What planets do you have an aspect to your moon? And then again, the moon can relate to how do we feel comfortable getting what we need? And are we able to relate to our own emotions? And this ability to relate to our emotions can really impact how we create relationships and engage in relationships in adulthood. So again, you really want to see what your moon in your chart, what aspects to other planets there are. So like a moon Lilith conjunction or aspect can indicate power dynamic differentials or dislike or difficulty with intimacy. And then moon Pluto tends to indicate like family secrets or like skeletons in the closet. And this of course depends on house placement. But if you're looking at a family dynamic and like you see that a lot of the kids and people have like moon Pluto, then you would be like, okay, there's something going on here. So again, we're looking for patterns, we're looking for themes, we're looking for similarities and differences between charts in this ecosystem to kind of see what the family story is. And so then another interesting thing, so the first house is your identity. And so if you have the moon in the first house, you probably identify with your mother. Whereas if you had the sun or Saturn in the first house, you probably identify with the father. So that's also interesting when you look at family charts. So say there was like a messy divorce between the parents and kids sided with different parents. Look at their first house and see if one has the moon or one has the sun or Saturn in those different houses. And that can be really illuminating to kind of see how those dynamics kind of played out. So then we have Saturn. So Saturn is kind of can indicate where there is shadow in your chart. It can indicate the father or the grandfather, but it definitely indicates that kind of family authority. So the families have kind of their own set of rules. Sometimes, I don't know if you remember as a kid going to like another kid's house, and it was weird because like the things that they took seriously or could not do were so different from your own. So you're like, that's weird. I don't understand why that's a big deal. Whereas when they came to your house, they probably thought the same thing. They were like, why is this a big deal? So things that your family takes very seriously are Saturn. And it's tasks imposed on you and that drive towards mastery, but that could be external pressure coming from your family. Whereas if you're looking at in a natal chart, in general, it could be internal pressure. So again, we're kind of shifting our glance a little bit towards this more, wishy-washy family system lens. So again, this light and darkness concept, when we're comparing siblings to parents and siblings to each other, is there a chart that's more similar? Do certain siblings have the same Saturn placement or sign or aspects as a certain parent? Can you see which child is kind of that child that's more in light and which one is kind of more in the shadow? Maybe the one with a very prominent Saturn has that more kind of shadow role in the family. And that is, I think, the same thing I put on the other slide. But it's just really interesting to see how that plays out. And if you're looking at multi-generational ones, is there an aspect that's coming from the grandparents that's kind of going all the way through? Does it not apply to the parents, but is it popping up again in the grandchildren? So all those different things are important to look at. So one thing I do want to bring up are Mars-Saturn aspects, in particular the opposition. So I see the Mars-Saturn opposition a lot in people that have kind of more difficult family lives. Again, this doesn't mean that you have to, that necessarily applies to you, but it is a tendency that I see a lot, particularly the opposition, more so than the conjunction or the square. And that tends to be because of, the unique aspect that this creates. So Mars is your will, your vitality, your desire to achieve. If an obstacle comes, like how you're going to deal with that. Are you going to go over, through, around, take a breath, you're trying to figure it out? That is all kind of determined by Mars, its sign, its placement. And structures, and Saturn is like, no, we are the structure. I am the wall that you're trying to get around. It's that family authority. So those rules that your parents are trying to impress on you to kind of mold and shape you in their image, that is Saturn. And so if you have an opposition, that individual desire to create is at odds with that family authority that's trying to be stamped onto you. And it can indicate like an inability for your desires to be seen and met. And if you have like Uranus involved aspecting Mars at all, it could really show that what you want is so different from the family structure that it just creates a lot of tension. So it's almost like your parents, the more you try and assert your Mars, the more your parents or a family authority will try and like keep that in check. So that tension can just really indicate a difficult family dynamic. And again, not overcomable, but difficult. So then, I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to this, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that some people say, like in a day chart, the mother is Venus and the father is Sun, and in a night chart, the mother is Moon, but the father is Saturn. But I kind of think you need to look at all of it. I do see more Moon stuff than Venus, but it is just, good to look at everything and kind of see what comes up. All right, let's talk about the houses. So are you all familiar with houses, just kind of what they look like? So it's like you have the chart and you have the different pie pieces, and there's 12 houses, starts at 1, goes around and comes above. So the house at the very bottom of the chart is the 4th house. And this is definitely like the primary place that you look at for looking at family stuff. So the 4th house is foundations, ancestry. If you've ever like watched a family movie like Lord of the Rings, when they're in Rohan and the king's like, my father's father, or the fathers that came before me, or like, I am son of this, that's all 4th house. It's like that lineage that you're embodying. You're the 5th son of this, that is the 4th house stuff. And so if you had something like Saturn in the 4th house, something's really coming through that family tradition, that like patrilineage, you want to embody that, or you have a lot of, you might not even know that you want to embody that because it's like so part of your identity. And so then like another example, like say you had strong Gemini in the 4th house, it could indicate maybe like a divergent like branches of your family. So depending on the sign and kind of planets in your 4th house, it can indicate kind of different family dynamics. But if you see like Uranus in the 4th house, then that can really indicate an instability, because Uranus is changeable and has a lot of volatility, and it isn't like a grounding planet, which you probably want in the 4th house, because that, again, that's your foundation. That's how you kind of go forward towards something. It's your springboard towards being able to be yourself in the world. So you think about that 4th, 10th house opposition. The 10th house is the career, how you're seen. And it's difficult to be seen and get accolades if you don't have that firm foundation that's letting you stand on that. So yeah, Uranus can be a challenge there, and it can show like something very unusual about home life growing up. So we have the 5th house. The 5th house is the house of children, and it can indicate your relationship with your children. It can indicate if you have like a lot of children or have some fertility challenges. And so if you have a moon or sun in that house, you might be that child's favorite. Or that parent's favorite. So like if your moon was there, you might be your mom's like most beloved little peanut. But if your father's there, like he might have really taken an interest in you, and you were like, you know, his person. Versus if your moon or sun is in the 8th house, like you maybe are more likely to be that child that was in the shadow, that maybe you were kind of the odd one out, or the one that you had a more tense relationship with your parents, or that parent indicated. But more than just children, the 5th houses are need to be loved and have attention and validated by the world. So you think about children, they have this visceral need to be seen. So when they come up to you and they're like, Mom, look at this, Mom, look at this. It's like that. We never really lose that. We just, channel that into different things. So we're still that little kid that's like, look at this, look at me, look at me cartwheeling. That's still there. And so I think it's important to think about, have we given that child any attention? Has that inner child like ever gotten a word of validation, or are we just being tough on it, being like, why aren't you doing this? Like, you need to check in with that little internal kid and see if their needs are being met, because if they're not, then that insecurity will start coming out in other ways. And maybe take a look at your 5th house in your chart and see if maybe there are some obstacles there, maybe some more malefic or difficult planets that makes it difficult for you to be able to relate to that inner child. And so then maybe doing some inner child work would be helpful in kind of unlocking other parts of your chart. And then we have the 8th house. So the 8th house is a difficult house. There's places for everything in astrology, and life is full of joys and challenges. So the 8th house is mystery. It's things that are difficult to verbalize, things that below the surface. Kind of what I said here. So like, when you're talking to someone and it's like you're having a conversation, but that there's like so many other dynamics going on. And it's like you're saying one thing, but you mean another. Or like the elephant in the room that's not being addressed, that you are like desperately trying to talk around. All those types of communications are all 8th house territory. It's interesting on Zoom because it's mostly that verbal conversation. We don't have all those subtle cues that are so important for interaction and relationship building. So we're kind of like in this, like, we need the 8th house, even though it is a more difficult house. And we've kind of like had to be in it in a different way during COVID. It's more that isolation away from everyone versus that like being able to engage in like different, deeper ways. So I think it's going to be interesting this summer when people start to interact again, how these nonverbal communications kind of play into that. Some darker things, it can also indicate abuse. So like I was doing a client reading and they had Pluto, Mars, and Lilith conjunction in their 8th house. I think their moon was in there too. And so when you're doing a reading and you see abuse markers, you want to be very delicate and not just kind of jump in and maybe trigger someone. You want to kind of give them space to be able to talk about it. But like a heavy malefic power dynamic indicating conjunction or aspect in the 8th house can indicate some of those more darker things, because the 8th house is things unsaid, things below the surface, things you want to avoid or not deal with. But it can be empowering if you have gone through that, to see that in your chart and see that that's not the only thing in your chart. There's lots of other aspects and lots of other places that have the ability to kind of transform maybe some of those more challenging or detrimental things that you've gone through to create a new story for yourself and not have that be the focus of your story. And again, moon in the 8th house just really can indicate like issues with the mother. So it can be something like that the mother, so the chart, when you have a chart, it's not just about you, unfortunately. It's about like everyone around you. And as we're talking about, it could be about people you've never met that are like your ancestors. So the moon in the 8th house can indicate that your mother is kind of stunted in some way, or has an unhealthy pattern or traumatic pattern that she hasn't been able to transform, that is unfortunately part of your heritage now. We all have unhealthy patterns that we've inherited from our parents, because our parents are human and we live in a kind of a messed up world, so people aren't going to respond perfectly all the time, and so we inherit that, unfortunately. And as I was kind of saying before, it's our job, if we're interested in this material, to be the one that's going to transform these patterns. And by us doing that for ourselves, we do help all of the other people in our family.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question. So is that passed down from generation to generation, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that these patterns are absolutely transferred down from generation to generation. You think about it, your grandparent raised your parent who raised you, and there's like a direct line. So say your great grandmother was abusive towards your mother, or towards your grandmother, who was then abusive to your mother, who was then abusive to you. Like, whose fault is that? Or is that a family dynamic that you inherited, and whose job? It's not your fault that happened, but I do think it is your responsibility to kind of change that if you want to be your best version of yourself, and you want to be an authentic, creative human being that's able to kind of take life on your own terms.
So you have to be the one to stand up and identify it and be the one to say, I don't want to, I need to be the one to break this cycle if things are going to change.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, you don't have to, but you're going to be reacting instead of responding to life. And I don't think you'll ever be your own person if you're not able to kind of look at these more difficult topics that all families have and say, I'm not just going to like let this go anymore. We need to change this. Like, someone has to.
Okay. So another question. Sorry.
That's okay.
So would it be in the same house, or it just depends, or how does that go? Like from generation?
It just depends. The 8th house is a more difficult house. So again, if you have a lot of 8th house stuff, not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that anything is your fault, but it does tend to mean that you have to deal with like a lot of other people's bullshit. Like the 8th house is other people's stuff. So like if you have a lot of planets in the 8th house, you might be like, why are all these people like coming to me with their problems? And so it's like you see like people that are therapists have a lot of planets in their 8th house because their job is literally dealing with other people's problems. So like you can take these tendencies in your chart and you can kind of transform them into a more positive way. And I think that's going back to your question, are you going to be the one that's like, I'm going to change this and channel this pattern that I have into something more productive? Or am I going to let it be just like other people like harassing me all the time and me being at the whim of their needs, instead of maybe transforming that into being a therapist where you get paid to do that? You know what I
And
mean?
this is the house that Scorpio falls in.
Yeah, so I don't subscribe to each house is
Okay.
with a sign, but
Okay.
I know that a lot of contemporary astrologers do. So if you subscribe to this, yes, that would be that parallel. But I
Okay.
think that they're just kind of separate systems, and it limits each other if you conflate them.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions so far? Okay. So yeah, so the 8th house, big topic. And there's kind of a lot there to explore if you have a lot of planets there or if a family member does. So the next one is the 12th house. So the 12th house is like that subconscious, in traditional astrology, like enemies, self-undoing. But I see a lot of it just kind of concealed from the public. It's the house of hidden things. So who sees you more? Like, if you are concealed from the public, who will get to know you more than your family? So your family is also concealed from the public. Like, what goes on inside of a house isn't necessarily what the public is seeing. So as we'll see in some examples, I think that shows a dichotomy between a public life and a personal life. And so again, like if the moon is here, there could be like no room for you in the family dynamic. Maybe your family dynamic is being smothered in your private life. It can be like a closeted emotions. Again, we have this issue of light being obscured in the 12th house. But again, as we'll see, I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad. It could be bad. It could be a protective thing. You see a lot of like really rich people or royals that have the sun in the 12th house. And it's like, we're never going to know who they are really. We'll see their public image, but we don't see them. And that's kind of too bad for them, but also it could be protective, because if your job is to be in the spotlight, maybe you need that, barrier or boundary between you being you and you being on and like having that, work persona. But yeah, I think that a lot of like unconscious mental programming falls into the 12th house, which again comes a lot from how we grew up, what was values instilled in us as we were children. So it's just interesting to see things that are there. Okay, so then just some other house topics to look at. So again, we have that identifying with the planet in the first house. So it could be the mother, father. The second house is survival issues. So it can be like visceral things. And if you see like big survival issues, it could be like you and your family group like in a lot of poverty, just things like that. So if you see a lot of planets in the second house, it just, pull on that string. Third house is siblings, but it's only really siblings because it's like your day-to-day. And when you were little, your day-to-day life like really involved your siblings. So in like early education, things like that. Excuse me, sorry, I'm not used to talking this much anymore. So you can kind of look at the third house. So then as I was talking about the fourth house with like father lineage, the fourth house is the house of the father. So if you want to also like look at the ruler of the fourth house to get some insights about the father. And the 10th house is the house of the mother. So again, kind of going back to the alethiometer analogy, we're looking at things from multiple perspectives. So the 10th house can be about the mother, the ruler of that can be about the mother, but it can also be about career and things like that we've talked about. Each planet in each house has multiple meanings. And so when we're looking at a certain thing, we're going to be putting on another lens to look at it that way. And then the first and seventh house are grandparents. And it's like, this took me a really long time to get my head around. So if you get confused, like, don't worry about it, just accept it. So the fourth and the 10th house are the parents. And so then the fourth and the 10th house from the fourth and the 10th house are the first and the seventh. So that's how they get to those types of meanings. Okay. So then other things that I look at when I'm looking at family dynamics are conditions of the ruler of the chart. So is your ruler of your chart kind of in detriment or is it exalted? Which family members fit together? So if you have a big family, are there like certain people that kind of match, that kind of have similar vibes? Like, look into that. What are the angular relationships? Is like everyone in your family a mutable rising, or are they like all Scorpio risings or something like that? So looking at the rising sign, planetary themes, but also that angular relationship. So like people that have a lot of mutable angles, like maybe they likely like they moved around a lot, and that kind of creates a different family dynamic than someone that maybe has all fixed and it's like their entire lineage is like they're the third or fifth generation living on that farm or whatever. Uranus, we kind of go against tradition, rebelling, a pattern that kind of goes against the accepted model. So a strong Uranus could indicate that maybe they are like the black sheep of their family. Do men and women in the family have different dynamics? So like in a chart example we're going to go through, it's like the men are very emphasized, and like I could barely find any information on a lot of the women of the family. And just interesting to know that. So if you're looking at like your father's side versus your mother's side of the family, do you and your siblings' charts kind of take after one of the other? So that might indicate if you want to do ancestor work, that kind of a lot of your karmatic stuff is kind of coming from one side of the family. Are there retrograde themes in your family? So like in my family's chart, like all of us have, except for one, we all have our Mercury in retrograde. And I was talking to my sisters about it and we were like, this explains a lot. Like difficulty with direct communication. But like does your family have like a lot of planets in retrograde, or are they like all direct? Maybe you're like very direct with each other. Again, you got to look at the family's moon. Are their elemental natures in harmony? Are they conflicting? Do you have similar planets conjuncting your moon? And then planetary spreads. I have an example of this in the next slide, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with planetary spreads. So like, are all the planets in one quarter of the chart? Are they more spread out? Do they have this bucket handle formation, which we're going to look at? It's interesting to see kind of those, just another pattern to look at in a family chart. Patterns of Chiron. Do they all fall into the same house? Are they all, does everyone in your family have Chiron conjuncting the same planet? Like things like that, you definitely want to take note of and kind of look at that. And then this one is interesting. We're going to look at this chart example. Does the rising sign of any of the children echo any stelliums of a parent? And that will be really interesting. And then are there any node similarities? So like, does everyone have like major planets conjunct their south node or their north node? Or do they all have like the same nodal configurations or similar ones? So those are all things to kind of take note of when you're looking at family charts. So let's look at some examples. So I have all the information for some of these more personal charts of people that I have done readings for or know blocked out, so you can't see their names or their information. Sorry about that. But this is a great example of a bucket handle formation. So you see that most of the planets are here, but there's one planet all the way over here, kind of opposite all this stuff. And you'll notice that this is the handle of the bucket handle is the moon conjunct Chiron in the first house. So this is interesting. So this person had a lot of problems with their mother. So it's interesting in the first house because you'd think, oh, well, maybe they identify them. But in this case, it just indicates that the mother took up like a lot of mental space and like a lot of resentment and active thinking about and making choices kind of against what they thought their mother would like. And you can see that if you see that the handle is the moon, it is like usually indicates problems with the mother. And we see Chiron conjunct this moon. So again, Chiron conjuncting a moon as the handle of the bucket handle. So those are kind of all different things that are leading to this one conclusion. So I think I've said this before, if you just see something one time in a chart, like maybe not, but if you see it multiple times, the more times that you see this theme pop up, the more important it is to this individual. So like this individual was very resentful towards their mother and very much identified with the father. And they would like go out of their way to kind of like shut their mother down or like create situations where the mother would embarrass themselves. So it's interesting how that just kind of plays out with this, you know, the mother is isolated. There's clear issues there. All right. So then this is going to be the child mirroring the parental stellium. So this is the father's chart. We see a stellium in Leo. And then we have the son's chart, which is an ascendant in Leo, but we also have Saturn right there in the first house. And in this case, Saturn definitely represents the father. So to do a little analysis, just to kind of show about, you know, the multi-generational effects, this person came to me to kind of talk about their relationship with their father. And so their father was from an abusive household. So markers of that chart, we can kind of see we've got Mars in the first house. So Mars can be kind of violence. It can be maybe aggression, fourth house, family. And so then Mars is in Capricorn. And so the ruler of that is Saturn. We have that in the 8th house. It's conjunct the south node. So kind of things that this person kind of needs to leave behind maybe are those family patterns of abuse there. And this person was also the child of immigrants. So interesting nodal story here. So we have this, you know, other people's stuff, other people's expectations kind of in the 8th house, and their kind of journey in this life was to kind of stand on their own 2 feet financially. And they did do that, but they definitely had some problems with their children kind of at the cost of that. And we see 5th house is in Aquarius, which, you know, maybe non-traditional relationship with your children, but it can also mean some maybe emotional distance. And again, Saturn is the ruler of that as well. And we have that in the 8th house. So going to the sun's chart, we have the Leo, so kind of that relationship, that family dynamic there. But if you'll notice, they also have a similar nodal story, the same nodes. What am I doing here? So yeah, we have the North Node in Scorpio, and then we have the North Node in Scorpio. So again, just kind of showing those inherited family dynamics. And just to kind of do a little bit more analysis on this chart. So we have the moon, and it was conjunct Pluto, and that would maybe indicate family secrets or something like that. But in this case, this person's mother died when they were very young, and the family never really talked about it. They were it was almost like the death was the secret. So it was something that was like unacknowledged. And I'm sure that did play a large part in their kind of mental life. Like they would think about it a lot, even though they can never talk about it. And so you have that Mercury right there and in the 3rd house. So that death really loomed over and shaped their childhood. And there was a lot of resentment towards the father. So you can see that resentment towards the father, again, really kind of shaped their identity. A lot of their life choices have been in reaction to kind of what the father wanted, or they like really went back and forth of trying to like please the father versus trying to do their own thing. So just kind of interesting to see how that dynamic played out. So then for my big analysis, I kind of wanted to do the Bush family, like George Bush. I don't necessarily agree with their politics, but I do think they're like an interesting family to look at. So they're in the public eye, so you'll be able to kind of see that, and they have a long history that we can go back towards. So the earliest one I chose was James Bush, and he was born June 5th, 1825. We don't have a birth time, but look at this stellium in Gemini we got here. That is like a lot of planets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in Gemini. So as you'll see, this kind of air emphasis is definitely present throughout this family's chart. So just a little bit about him. He was an attorney. An attorney? Did I say eternity? He was an attorney. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm having trouble with that. He was a chaplain. But eventually he had this big falling out with the church, and like although he was a chaplain for the Episcopalian Church for like many years, he didn't like one thing that they did and like completely went in a different direction. And I just thought that was interesting with like the dichotomy of Gemini with this emphasis of like, you know, going in the other directions. He was he wrote a lot, so very Gemini there. So then we go to Samuel Prescott, and he was kind of the one that kind of put the Bush family on the map. And I thought it was interesting that we still have this air stellium, again, no birth time, but it's in Libra. And so instead of that like writing, that maybe more cerebral, you know, talking to people, he was an industrialist. And and in Libra, although it's a relationship, it's also about like commerce and things like that. So he was also the start of the Bush family political aspirations. And kind of by looking at their chart, I kind of feel like that's a big part of their family legacy, because this Saturn Libra, and Saturn is exalted in Libra, is something that you'll see kind of play out through their family dynamic. So when you look at this chart, it's pretty much emphasized on air and water. Like, yeah, we've got like a little bit of earth and like a little bit of fire, but it's mostly a water air chart. So again, looking at this elemental pattern of this family and kind of seeing how that will play through the later generations. So yeah, start of the political aspirations. So then we move on to Prescott Sheldon Bush. And so he was the first one to go to Yale and the first one to become, or not the first one to go to Yale, but he was the first one to become a Skull and Bones member, which I thought that was a conspiracy theory, but I guess that's real. So yeah, so I think that's really interesting, especially because we've got a little Saturn in Scorpio over here. So it's like a little darker, like a little gothier. So joining a Skull and Bones, like secret Yale fraternity. And I guess this is kind of messed up, but the urban legend about him is that he stole Geronimo's skull, like him and a bunch of his buddies at Yale. So, all right, guy, like chill out, maybe don't do that. But I'm just not surprised with this little configuration we got here. And interesting that his he doesn't have the Saturn in Libra, but he rejected his father's help and wanted to be his own self-made man. But he still has this, you know, Gemini aspect. He still has this air aspect, but we have this, you know, this kind of new direction a little bit. We've got some of this more Cancer, which we're going to see play out in like George W.'s chart, but his chart's just a little bit different, and his Uranus is down here. Pretty much, that's like a loose opposition to his sun, so that would indicate maybe that wanting to go into his own direction and not necessarily wanting to follow his father's footsteps, and this emphasis towards individuality. But again, he became a senator, so he's still kind of fulfilling his father's wishes a little bit. He did become a senator, and you know, just kind of grew the political power. And so I think you can see his grandfather's influence with the Gemini, but he's still kind of perpetuating the Bush family name. So, oh yeah, who's this? George Herbert Walker. So interesting. So like I couldn't find like any information on their wives. So I think it's interesting that the men are like in such prominence and their wives are like almost an afterthought. So their wives all had like really great pedigrees. They were all came from like prominent families. And it's also interesting that they would make their wives maiden names, like the middle names of their children, but I couldn't really find any information on them. So I just think that's like an interesting shadow dynamic. You don't really find information on a lot of the women until we get to Barbara Bush, which is George Herbert Walker Bush's wife. So we see this Saturn in Libra starting to pop up again. So that exalted Saturn, that like into the authority of the family, kind of doing what the family wants, like a good attorney aspect. We have this air quality emphasized in the chart. We have this Sun in Gemini. We got this kind of Aquarius over here. We're starting to see some more fire elements come in. So we have this North Node conjunct his ascendant. Yeah, we do have a birth time for him. So he was able to really embody his destiny. He ended up with a big political career. He was like the head of the CIA for a long time. So it's interesting. We got Pluto in the 12th house, like head of the CIA. So that's like really interesting. And then he, as we all know, did become president, but it was only for one term. So I kind of feel like he did fulfill some of the family political aspirations, but the person that really did that was his son, because he was in for 2 terms. So this is Barbara Bush, and interesting with her. So sometimes you can see, do spouses kind of fit into the family dynamic? In her case, it's interesting because we have the Sun in Gemini in the 7th house. That could indicate her husband, who did have his Sun in Gemini. And that can indicate that like more of the emphasis of her life was on her partner, which it was. She was very much defined by her husband, and was like, I guess, a great wife or whatever. But something else that's interesting for her is that we have Chiron in the 5th house. And I don't know if you guys know this, I didn't know this, but they had a daughter that died when she was really young of cancer when she was 3. And so notice this Chiron in the 5th house that can show some pain or wounding from it doesn't necessarily have to be that your child is going to die. Like, don't worry if you have that. It could indicate lots of other things, but that is one of the possible things that it could indicate. But if you look at her two out of her 3 sons charts afterwards, they both have Chiron tightly conjunct their sun. So it will indicate in their charts that maybe behind closed doors, this loss of their sister really affected their mother and really kind of loomed large over their life, and they very much colored their relationship with her. So this is the sister that died of cancer. And notice this fire sun in the 12th house. We're going to see this start to pop up a lot in this family line now. So George W. Bush. So from then on, a lot of the Bush family has sun in the 12th house. So we don't really know what they're like behind closed doors. We don't know if it's like a public persona or kind of, what's going on behind closed doors. And that's interesting with George W. Bush, because one of the things that made him president was that people were like, oh, like, he's a Texas guy, like, I would have a beer with him, but like, he was born in Connecticut. So it's like, that, I don't even know if he was like fronting, but that like external charm wasn't necessarily who he actually was. And we see, where is it? So yeah, we see his moon conjunct Chiron right here, and his brother Jeb Bush will have that as well. We still have this air emphasis for this family. We've got this Libra kind of going on here. We are starting to see more fire. And I kind of, after looking at all these family charts, I kind of have a theory. So I feel like George W. Bush maybe didn't necessarily want to be president, or maybe he did, but that kind of was the fulfillment of all these ancestors' expectations. And now what does he do? He like paints. He like now can do all that creative stuff that he wants to do with this, like all this Leo is that creative expression. So he's like almost like he did his job and now he can do what he wants to do. And his children, you'll see, will have a lot more fire in them. And so it's almost like by him fulfilling that, he was able to let his children kind of do what they want to do, and none of them are in politics. Laura Bush. Let's look at his children. So the twin girls, you'll notice that they both have sun in fire signs in the 12th house. And if you ask them, so the Bushes were famous Republicans, but neither of his children are Republicans. And if you ask them, they say they're free thinkers. So I think that's, again, interesting that they're stepping away from that family legacy of being in the public eye, being prominent Republicans, and kind of more doing what they want now. But you see they still have that Saturn and Libra, that family kind of signature in their 10th house. So I kind of think that maybe their family legacy is defining who the public sees them as, but behind closed doors, they're able to be kind of more themselves, maybe more creative, maybe more philosophical. We don't know, and we wouldn't know with this 12th house emphasis. And then this is, let's see, which one? I think it's Jenna Bush's children. Yes. So Jenna Bush has 3 children, and you'll notice these fire 12th house sons. It's just like really interesting. And then the son, her son is, oh no, Margaret. So one of her children doesn't have that, but she still has a fire son. So it's like we've changed elements over in this family. It was like it almost hit a crescendo in George W. Bush, and now we've kind of shifted to a more fire and more earth family. So just kind of interesting to see that play out. And then we have Jeb. I just wanted to see his Chiron conjunct the moon. It's like same element also in earth, but different sign. So it's just kind of interesting how that plays out in families. And then he married someone that had a Saturn Libra, which I thought was interesting. So if you're more interested in family dynamics, I 100% recommend Lynn Bell. This is her book, Planetary Threads. She has a website, lots of lectures. A lot of my analysis is inspired by her work, plus a lot of my observations that I've made. But she's really great, and I highly recommend her. So that's it for family dynamics. I know we will go over your charts a little bit more once we stop recording, but any questions before we go over the weather? Okay. So as Kim brought up earlier, it was the equinox yesterday, so it's Aries season. Woo! And everything is direct right now, so that is awesome. So do all the things, enjoy it. Nothing is in retrograde. Like, get everything done that you want to now. And we got that Aries energy behind us, so like the world is your oyster. Go for it. So yeah, got all this stuff going into Aries. And then the 15th, Venus will go into Taurus. The 20th, the Sun goes into Taurus. And then on the 24th, Mars goes into Cancer. Right now it's in Gemini. And then we got some lunations coming up. Interested about this April full moon in Scorpio. I think that's going to be interesting. So keep your eye on that one. Then we do have a lot of transits between now and the next time we meet. So a couple ones I want to bring your eyes to is, so we have the superior conjunction of Venus. Oh my gosh, I didn't put the exact day. Hold on. I have this. Is on the 24th 26th, well, it's technically the 27th at 2 a.m. So Friday night at 2 a.m., maybe like 2:05 or something, is the exact superior conjunction of Venus and the sun. And I kind of think this is like, I don't know if you guys do intentions or magic-y type stuff or anything like that, but I'm using this time to like really get in touch with what my desires are and like what I want. And you know, Venus Aries like is good for knowing what you want and what will make you happy. And I do think that in order to like bring in relationships, if that's what you're looking for, then like you need to know what you want and what will make you a happy partner. So use this time for yourself and like fortifying your self-esteem and like figuring out what it is that's going to make you happy. And I think that'll be like a good use of that transit. Let's see. Oh yeah. And so then also on the 26th, Pluto is going to be 1 degree away from the native US native Pluto. So I think that's going to be interesting because we've kind of been building towards this reckoning that I've been talking about a lot. And I mean, it's going to like really pick up steam in 2022, but I have my eyes and ears out to kind of see what's in the news that day because I think it'll give us little clues. So we got some Chiron stuff happening. And then let's see what else we got here. Yeah, just like a lot of activity. So I think it's just going to be like, we're going to be feeling a lot of energy. And it's Aries season. So, you know, count to 10 before you go off on someone. Let's see. All right. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna stop recording and then we can go over everyone's charts. So stop share.